The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session, and we would like to cede the floor over to counsel for Mr. Kilsampon to continue putting questions.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Father Poncho, can you hear me? Let's just go back in time. But I am looking for some details. On several occasions, you talked about your time at the Embassy of France, along with others, and there was a Khmer Rouge cadre who came before you and told you that Khieu Samphan wanted to greet those taking refuge in the embassy, but that he was occupied elsewhere. My question to you is as follows. Did you find it reassuring, and perhaps did the others find it reassuring to hear the name of Mr. Khieu Samphan?
Response: No, he was a normal Khmer Rouge, and to us, we only knew that Khieu Samphan could have been a leader of the Khmer Rouge, like Pol Pot.
C'est vrai.
It's true. It's true. Nevertheless, in this very witness stand, you talked about his very good reputation. You talked about how high you held him in your esteem. You talked about his revolutionary ideals. Wouldn't such a reference be reassuring? Wouldn't it be comforting? Wouldn't you find it rather exceptional and a source of reassurance, especially for those there?
Response: For us, we saw Khmer Rouge evacuating the whole population from Phnom Penh. So any cadre of the Khmer Rouge would be the same. To us, Khieu Samphan would just be one of the leaders among many others.
Alors justement,
I'll go a bit further back in time and refer to two documents that are on the case file. I'll provide the specific references. These pieces are refugee testimonies that you yourself had probably transcribed yourself with a typewriter, and that you had related to the co-investigating judges during your interview. I would also like to refer to a press article entitled Cambodia Liberated that was published in 1976. You sent to the co-investigating judges 2 bundles of documents. They are under D133/1.4, ERN in French 00 41 03 79, ERN in English 00 8203, 77 to 78, and in Khmer 00, 84, 61, 28 to 29. The article entitled Cambodia Liberated is classified the document is classified as ERN French 00283 060 in Khmer 00323 728 and ERN in English 00323 68 to 80. This leads me to the following question. In the refugee accounts, and sometimes it's rather convoluted because even in your letter to the co-investigating judges, you stated to them that you had undertook a serious piece of work, but that it was not necessarily scientific. In here, we have an excerpt from a letter from Thailand, the 21st of November, 1975. It appears that you are transcribing a letter that was sent to you, and I'll write what is written in between the quotation marks. There is a strange silence surrounding Khieu Samphan and Hu Nim Yun. Have they been removed, as rumors say, or have they been eliminated? All this is not certain. A lot is being said about Ying Sari, and we see him everywhere. That's the first passage I wanted to put before you. And further on, in the article dated January 1976 rather, very little is said about Mr. Khieu Samphan. However, Mr. Ying Sari's activities are being recounted in detail. Mr. Witness, I would point out that you wrote what you had heard on the radio in November 1975, and in your article of January 1976, you talk about the silence surrounding the figure of Mr. Khieu Samphan. Can you please provide us some details?
Response. I wrote the truth. I recorded what I heard from the radio broadcasts of the Democratic Cambodia. It should be reminded that Mr. Samphan was not brother number one. Salot Saw was brother number one, and brother number two was Nuon Chia. And Khieu Samphan was even behind Ying Sari in this ordering. So the statement I put in writing was consistent with what I heard from the radio broadcasts and also consistent with the power shared within Angkar.
Toujours sur le même thème,
On the same topic, I believe that, given what I understood of what you described, and in response to a question put to you by the civil parties, you mentioned the name of a person that you had perhaps met. You talked about Lieutenant Chung.
qui est un
He's a military officer. He was a military officer who had escaped.
KUO.
His name is Lieutenant Kun, Kun. An officer who had escaped Democratic Kampuchea for Thailand, and he was interviewed by journalists.
Est-ce que vous avez cité le nom de cette personne?
Sir, did you mention the name of that person? Or am I mistaken?
The President, Mr. Witness, could you please hold on? Wait until you see the red light before you proceed. Response. In my book, Cambodia Year Zero, I changed all the names of the people because I would like to protect their identity for their safety.
D'accord, ma question.
Very well. My question was, if this morning, in response to a question, you talked about Mr. Pikling Kom.
C'est important pour
This is significant for our defense team because we have requested the admission of an interview this gentleman made with journalists concerning two sets of governments, a puppet government being led by Mr. Khieu Samphan and an active de facto government. Did you meet this individual?
Response. I met Mr. Pech Lam Kun in my route site in Thailand. It was perhaps in July 1976. He was a helicopter pilot. And he was in charge of giving advice to Angkar. And I asked him what Angkar was. He was in charge
He was responsible for all of the travels of Angkar.
I asked him what Angkar was. He said Angkar comprised of comrades Bot, Ham, Won, And I asked him again, who was Comrade Bot? And he said he didn't know. In this book, I said Bot could have been Nong Suan. Perhaps Salat saw Comrade Ham. I don't know who he was. But here, Comrade Ham sitting right in the courtroom, and Comrade Van was Ieng Sari. I only learned about this at a later stage, and I only learned at a later stage who belonged to Angkar. They fled Cambodia not because they hated democratic Cambodia. They did that because Angkar asked them to teach young peasants.
Père Panchaud.
Father Poncho, I must interrupt you. What is happening? What's going on? I'm talking about one single individual, Mr. Seng Ping Kun, who left not because he hated Angkar, but because Angkar had asked him to train young peasants to pilot helicopters. I'm sorry, but what's being heard, what's being translated, I understand that, but there is relay interpretation going on, so perhaps there is a small degree of loss. Unfortunately, this is the state of affairs. Let's move on. I want to center on a detail that you had provided in response to a question put by the President about what you had to do when the Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh in the days that followed April 17th. You explained that you served as a sort of tourist guide. At least that's what I heard in my earpiece. You recounted that there were some pockets of resistance of Lon Nol soldiers, but that wasn't the main cause of concern. It was really the Khmer Rouge soldiers who were accompanying you, and they wanted to know, you wanted to know, and they wanted to know, where were the American soldiers? Can you please confirm that?
Response: it is true. I was asked where the Americans were, and I told them that there were no American soldiers. They didn't believe me.
Ils s'attendaient véritablement.
Were they truly expecting to find American soldiers in Phnom Penh?
Response: yes, it is part of the propaganda by the Khmer Rouge. Even the documents that we have obtained here, they said that Americans were in Cambodia during the time of the war. And during Lon Nol regime, there were American advisors. However, there were no Lon Nol soldiers. It was part of the Khmer Rouge propaganda to say there were American soldiers in the country. There were some advisors in the country, but very few.
This leads me to another statement you made in response to a question put to you by the President. Apparently there were CIA agents with you and assembled at the Embassy of France. And as we know, the Americans had been evacuated. So how were you informed of this?
John left Cambodia on the 7th of April 1975. Later on, there was the head of CIA who was with us in the French embassy. Everyone knew him because there were American journalists and there was another person. He was the head of CIA in Cambodia. It was known to everyone at the embassy.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I wish to turn now to a linguistic matter. You have achieved a very impressive piece of work by listening to these radio broadcasts in your attempt to understand the new language of the Khmer Rouge. You've even dedicated a few pages in your book on the matter. You also talk about it in the article published in January 1976 called Cambodia Liberated. Can you please talk to the Chamber about the issues that you raise in that press, about the warlike language, the warrior-like terminology to describe even the most mundane of tasks? I'll cite for a few examples, but I'll let you expand on this. You talk about the struggle to develop products with much courage, struggling to clear the forests, struggle to dig dikes, struggle to fish, work actively with combativeness to attack the work of cattle. What can you tell us about your understanding of this new language, of this very war-like dialect to describe the most daily of tasks?
Response. To understand the Khmer Rouge and the mistakes this regime has committed, we need to understand that Khmer Rouge won the victory over Tribunal because of the American bombings in Cambodia. They won the victory because they engaged in the attack, and when they won such a victory, they still used such terms. They said peace was a new war. They had to attack the internal enemies and the nature to pave way for such a victory, and they had to win victory over this like they won victory over the enemies. There were two battlefields, the front battlefields and the front battlefields refer to digging canals, digging dikes, and the rear was about normal work in the villages, and everything was people were organized like an army to grow or to do farming. The regular army or the mobile units comprised of youth were meant to build canals and dikes. And there was another group comprised of people who got married, and the husband would be working far from home. So all the people could be regarded as a group of army that attacked, but attacked in the sense of cultivation.
Production.
Vous avez d'ailleurs
And by the way, in your book, you also noted that this vocabulary was so widespread that you could find it even when you would speak with refugees in Thailand.
Even now, we use the word Samdai Dejo. Sometimes we use the Khmer Rouge term as well. Sometimes we use it unknowingly. So when we say we eat right, we use the word hope.
Non, hope, c'est pas espoir, c'est manger.
No, hope is not hope. It means to chow down.
pour continuer sur
And to continue with the refugees, I would like you to speak to us about the position of Thailand in regard to the refugee camps in Thailand as of when these camps were set up on Thai territory. What was Thailand's stance? What was Thailand's position in vis-à-vis these camps? And if you know, could you tell us about this?
Thai wants to achieve its own gain.
Munabong
At first, when I crossed the border in May 1975, Thailand said that there was no refugee. In fact, I knew very clearly because my friend had crossed the border. There were thousands of Khmer people living along the border. From 1975 to 1976, there were around 20 refugee camps along the border. But Thailand wants to see how Khmer Rouge would act toward Thailand. If the Khmer Rouge did nothing, we would remain quiet. Near Ranya Pratet, in 1976, in June 1976, I met a group of high-ranking soldiers, including colonel, such as Yukmon, Katret. There were 4 or 5 high-ranking soldiers. They organized the army to attack the Khmer Rouge. But
Kine kram om night about Thai. Ketret kang vanna Yokman kine kram om night about Thai.
Yukmon was under the Thai control. President, you can put more questions.
Merci de votre aide.
Thank you for your assistance, Mr. President. I tried to interrupt you, in fact, because I wanted you to tell us which country these soldiers came from, and you didn't tell us. Well, the question that I put to you was, what was, if you know, the Thailand's political position vis-à-vis the refugee camps in Thai territory? Was it, did they try to hide these camps? Did they ever try to close down these camps? So I would like to get, yes, maybe my question was a bit too broad, so maybe this is a more detailed explanation.
Timui Khmer ka
Thailand agreed to welcome the refugees who were against the Khmer Rouge. But Thailand controlled the refugees in order to achieve its own political gains. From 1979, when the Vietnamese troops entered Cambodia, hundreds of thousands of refugees fled into Thailand. Millions of refugees. At that time, Thailand did not accept the refugees anymore. Around 300,000 around 30,000 refugees were dropped from Pravahir mountain. At the time, the United Nations created UNBROK to help the refugees.
United Nations Border Relief Operation.
At the time, there were at least 40,000 refugees in Thailand. Thailand agreed to accept to recruit some of the refugees as the soldiers.
Vous avez dit qu'il y avait
You said that there were, back then, 40,000 refugees in Thailand?
Colleague lawyer, you may proceed.
The President, Mr. Witness, could you please hold on? Counsel for the Suwa Party, you may proceed first.
More than an objection, in fact, I would like to make a few comments on the method that there's a total confusion between dates and periods. I hear about UNTAC, or there's total confusion regarding figures, so maybe you could ask questions and you might have the solution. You might be the only one to have the solution. So I think maybe you should ask questions that are extremely specific, with specific dates and specific references, that might avoid this chaos right now. Thank you.
pour répondre
In order to respond, of course, I would love to do so. But as you know, Mr. President, and as you know, dear colleagues, the problem with questions that are too specific is that they may give rise to objections because they might people might believe that I might be suggesting or leading the witness. So this is why I always start with open questions. But indeed, as we see, there are problems with the interpretation, which might explain that things are not as clear as they should be. But to be more precise about what you were saying, we heard first that there were 40,000 refugees in Thailand. So is that what you said, 40,000? What I'd like to know is if there was any kind of tension that was perceptible in these refugee camps, and refugees per se, of course, are vulnerable. Was there any kind of threat hovering over the refugees, threat of being sent back to Cambodia by Thailand?
Response. From 1975 until 1978, when the Democratic Cambodia was in power, there were about 50,000 refugees in Thailand. Thai did not like the presence of the refugees, but they had no choice but to accept them. Sometimes the Thais killed the refugees who entered into Cambodia. They had killed several thousand of Cambodian refugees who could find their way to Thai territory. At that time, it was in 1976. Some Cambodian soldiers, as I already talked to you about their names, including Yok Mon, Kong Wan Na, Ket Raid. These individuals created an army in order to oppose the Khmer Rouge. However, Thais sometimes allowed them to fight the Khmer Rouge, but on some occasions didn't do so. Then they killed all these leaders of the soldiers. They killed them all.
Les Thaïs
The Thai, was it?
ont tué ses commandants.
So it is the Thai who killed these commanders.
Response: Thai soldiers killed these Khmer soldiers who opposed the Khmer Rouge.
Est-ce que cette
And was this situation that you have just described, this beyond the situation of vulnerability of the refugees, was this extra political problematic context something that you could take into account or something that the refugees could take into account in the description of what they had experienced in Cambodia? Did this have any influence? Is this something that you took into account as well?
Response: That's what I was thinking about. I was thinking of the Khmer refugees in Thailand who could have had difficulty living there. However, the accounts of the Khmer Rouge were true.
Ce n'est pas les Khmer Rouges qui disaient la vérité.
It's not the Khmer Rouge who were saying the truth.
I think perhaps we have some interpreting problem because what I said would not be properly conveyed. I did not wish to speak in French because I did not want people to see that I was helping the defense at the same time.
I'm afraid you're going to say that I prefer the defense if I only speak French. So there's really a problem with translation. If the prosecution does not see any problem with this, I will speak French. But I'm afraid that you will say that I favor the defense in this case. This is why
the President, the chamber allows you to speak in French from now on. This is the decision by the chamber.
Please ask your question again. I think you already answered the question despite everything. So I think I will turn to the next question. Mr. President.
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe we should turn to the next question because we were still translating the last sentence of the witness, which was the following. It was said, the interpretation said that it's the Khmer Rouge who were telling the truth. And I imagine that it was rather the refugees who were speaking the truth. So could this be confirmed before we move on to the next point? Thank you.
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, please, of course, witness. Please proceed. Please, I said that even considering the political context in which the refugees in Thailand were oppressed by the Thai army, which actually is a fact, they were behind barbed wire, and the Thai soldiers were not particularly friendly to the Khmer refugees. But despite this Thai pressure, when the refugees were being questioned on what they had experienced in democratic Kampuchea, morally speaking, we can be convinced that they were saying the truth. At least that was my conviction. Because when you interview someone, there is, of course, a feeling between the interviewer and the interviewer. We can see if the person being interviewed is lying or not. Yes, of course, but sometimes you can be misled. Yes, that's true. Well, I didn't want, of course, to question the honesty of the work that you performed, but you, in fact, you were honest enough to tell the co-investigating judge when you gave him these 2 wads of refugee accounts that you had done a serious job, however, not a scientific job. So I'm just trying to underscore and trying to allow you to comment on the difficulties that you faced when you interviewed these refugees who were in a difficult situation, refugees who were in a country that did not really accept them. And another difficulty that I wanted to ask you about is you explained to the co-investigating judge, I believe, that before you interviewed these refugees, some people would identify these refugees ahead of time, or would take notes with them before. Is that so?
Donc cela signifie comme
This means that when you would meet later these refugees, they had been in that camp where you met them for quite a while.
On a raconté
So many ridiculous things were said about me. For example, if you look at the Libération newspaper that followed the Monde article, and the headline was priest, journalist, French Secret Service agent, and CIA secret agents, saying that the refugees were chosen ahead of time by the camp leaders before speaking to us directly. So who do these people think they were? I don't need people to choose the refugees for me. When I went to the camps, I would just sit down on the ground and I would speak to the people directly, asking them, well, so what did you do? Where do you come from? Etc., etc. It was not the camp administration that would determine ahead of time which refugees I would have to interview. This is pure nonsense. And I would even say that this is defamation. Nobody ever chose people for me to interview. And this should be clear. Well, of course, I didn't want to go that far. I mean, to say, go as far as what maybe such and such a French daily might have written, but I see that it's almost 4 o'clock. So before I start a new line of questioning, maybe I can... So maybe we could adjourn now and resume tomorrow morning with this.
The President, you have 5 more minutes.
Dans votre
In your book, you explain that, well, you speak about the 12 revolutionary commandments, and you say that the refugees that you met knew these 12 commandments. And you also say that the soldiers who were guarding the French embassy after the fall of Phnom Penh would recite these commandments every morning. So, this leads me to believe that there was a certain kind of ethical thoroughness within the troops in terms of the propaganda that was disseminated, and that this was important.
Je confirme tout à fait.
Absolutely confirm that the soldiers, the Khmer Rouge fighters, were disciplined, absolutely. And at the French embassy, we had young boys, maybe they were 13 or 14 years old, who were watching over us, and they would recite the 12 Khmer Rouge commandments. And I don't know how well they understood them, but in any case, they would recite them. And morally speaking, yes, generally speaking, we can say, yes, that the Khmer Rouge army behaved in a very, very strict and ethical way. Well, ethical, of course, in the sense that they would kill if they felt it was necessary, but in terms of their conduct, especially in terms of their sexual conduct, I could say that basically speaking, well, of course, all right, there were sometimes incidents, but basically speaking, they stuck to a very strict moral line. Thank you.
The President, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Witness, and thank you, Counsel. The hearing today is now coming to the time when we should adjourn, and today's session will be adjourned, and the next sessions will be resumed by tomorrow at 9 a.m. During tomorrow's sessions, the Chamber continues hearing the testimony of Mr. Francois Poncho until his testimony is complete. Mr. Poncho, your testimony is not yet finished, so we would like to ask you to return to the courtroom again tomorrow. And we believe that perhaps we may need just the whole morning for tomorrow to hear your testimony. And court officer is now directed to bring Mr. Poncho to his residence and have him returned to the courtroom before 9 a.m. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nuon Chi and Khieu Samphan back to the detention facility and have them returned to the courtroom before 9 a.m. tomorrow. Mr. Nuon Chi is directed to be brought to the holding cell where he can observe the proceedings. From there, Mr. Khieu Samphan is to be returned to the courtroom. The court is adjourned.